Next up, we got Dan Antonelli. Dan is like, I would say, the godfather of branding, like to the point where like I read his book. It's a fantastic book, man. And it's so good as far as like, I'm now a branding snob. So when I drive around, I'm looking at these truck wraps and I'm like, man, they need to call Dan. Like that just, it's not standing out in any unique way whatsoever. So we got Dan, and I'm gonna front load or just kind of set the expectations of Dan's talk. This may be the most frustrating talk that you hear today, because this is like if somebody 20 years later said, hey, you named your kid the wrong name, and you're like, oh God, you're right. It's very eye-opening, but man, it's gonna be really, really, really beneficial. So Dan, how you feeling?
What's up, brother?
What's up, man? All right, Dan, you
Man,
got the stage.
that's a
You
tough
got
act
it.
to follow, man. Following Dave with that energy. I didn't have enough Red Bulls this morning, so I don't know if I
I
can do it. I'm
know,
gonna do the best
but
I can, though.
but you're New York, New Jersey, man. You just live on that. So you got it. I'm out.
All right. Hey guys, listen, thanks so much for being here today. I have a pretty robust presentation for you today. So I'm going to try to go through it quickly. It summarizes a lot of the things that I talk about in my book. If any of you have read my book, thank you for that support. I really appreciate it. I basically wrote it to try to educate home service contractors on how to build a brand, what goes into that, and just looked at the last 25 years of experience that I have in doing that for so many home service contractors, and put everything I kind of know into that book. So this presentation is kind of a summary of some of those points that I make in the book. And let me just get to it. All right, so let me share my screen. All right. Awesome. So I assume you guys can all see that. So branded, not blanded, building an epic home service brand. Before I start, it's really, really important that I make this notation. I had nothing to do with the Antonelli's Cheese Shop logo. Okay, that's really important for me to make sure you guys all know that. Nothing at all to do with this. It frustrates me every time I see it. I absolutely hate this logo, and it has my name on it. And people say, "Oh my God, is that your logo?" And I'm like, "No, no, no, I had nothing to do with it." So I just had to clear the air, make sure everyone knew that. Okay. So about me, I run Kick Charge Creative. We have a 20-person agency here in New Jersey. I have about 2,000 home service brands that we've created here. Between all the designers, probably over 100 years experience. I wrote 4 logo design books, and my latest book is called Branded, Not Blanded, which is right here. You can pick it up on Amazon, or you could actually get it on our website, which is kickcharge.com/books. And our main philosophy here is we change lives and we design as if lives were at stake. That means the responsibility that we're given is super critical, and we really look at that responsibility as sacred when we're branding any company that works with us. This is a picture of me lettering my first home service truck when I was probably 16 years old. I'm sporting a pretty kick-ass mullet right here and some pretty nice high tops. But honestly, this is really a cool example because I'm doing a plumbing and heating company, which is a home service company. This is in Staten Island, New York, where I grew up. And this is really, I started getting the passion for working with small businesses, and really also this exposure to actually working on vehicles became something that is obviously what we're well known for as one of the pieces of what we do in branding. But this experience was really beneficial for me to actually experience what this medium can do and what it's capable of. So the most important things we're going to talk about today is this fact. It's not even like a theory. This is a fact, right? So the idea that overspending on advertising is the tax that businesses spend for being unremarkable. Okay, so think about that for a second. What does that really mean? It means the weaker your brand, the more money you need to spend on it. Okay, so you have a lot of companies that are very successful with really shitty brands, right? So how did that happen? Well, they just spent a lot more money on advertising. My idea and my philosophy is I want you to spend the least amount of money on your marketing so that you can really be visible in that community. And it functions in so many different ways, but the idea of being remarkable as opposed to being unremarkable. Okay. The weaker the brand, the more money you will need to spend on your marketing. That's, again, not bullshit theory. That is an absolute fact. We have so many case studies that really prove this fact. I think some of our clients probably have some of the lowest averages in terms of how much money they spend on marketing as a percentage of revenue, things like that, right? So the biggest thing that we need to address right here is this is who your target is, okay? And she has no idea who you are. And of course, Google loves you for that, right? So, and why do they love you for that? Because it just means you have to spend more money in marketing your business, right? Because if you're invisible in the community and you want to be known when someone is searching for you, well, you got to pay Google to play that game, right? 84% of your potential customers do not know your name when searching for a home service contractor. Now, think about that for a minute, right? 84% of the people you're trying to sell to have no freaking idea who you are, right? That's a huge, huge problem, right? That means that what are you going to have to do to overcome that? Well, you're going to have to spend more money on advertising, on PPC, on LSA, and all those other things. What would happen if people knew your name when they were ready for service? Some of this even goes in conjunction with Dave was just talking about with direct mail, right? The repetition of that branding within that community. And the vehicle is the most critical part of your branding within your community. Okay. So how do you build a remarkable brand? You brand and not bland like everyone else. Most of your competitors are probably really suffering from weak branding, right? And you're likely similar to that, right? So how do you build something that's much more remarkable, that stands out? Okay. So key points: investing in your brand makes all your marketing work better. We already talked about that. Easier to close higher ticket sales. Okay. A lot of people talk about higher ticket sales. I want to get paid more for my work. How do I do that? Well, first of all, you got to look the part, right? That's the first part. Secondly, you got to deliver a great service, a great value, right? And you have to have the client believe that you can deliver great value, great service. Again, your competition likely doesn't understand branding and how to leverage their weakness to your advantage and how you can leverage their weakness, right? So most companies deliver a great service. They just don't look like they do. Okay. What would happen to your business if you looked as good as the service you provided? How would that help you? So leverage your vehicle, of course, 100%, right? Make sure that that truck is working properly. The problem is that probably 90% of every truck wrap on the road today is almost a waste of money because it's not done correctly. It's not branded properly. You can't read it. There's a whole host of issues with most of the truck wraps on the road. But if we can win the battle at the street level so that your business is already top of mind. So instead of searching air conditioning repair Las Vegas, they're actually typing in your branded name. Of course, you're going to win the game online if they're typing in your branded name, right? It's much easier for you to rank higher for your own brand versus having to pay all this extra money to show up higher on competitive keywords, right? So having people say you've seen your truck isn't really actually what's most important. It's what does your truck say about your company? That's what makes the difference, right? I could put a pink truck out on the road. Everyone say, oh my God, I see your trucks all the time. The problem is what does it communicate about brand promise? What does it communicate about what the expectation of service is going to be? And that's where guys get that part wrong. When the people say, oh my God, I see your trucks. And they think, oh my God, yeah, that's awesome. But it's not, it's only one piece of it. The other piece of it is what does it say about it? So recruitment and culture is also easier with a better brand. What's the biggest problem that home service contractors have is that they say that they can't get people to work for them, right? No one wants to work for me, right? A lot of times it doesn't look like a place that most people would want to work for anyway, right? So that's how branding can really affect culture. It can reflect recruitment. It can make it look like a place that people are proud to be a part of. And again, too, the longer you wait to rebrand or do your branding right, the more expensive it will be to do it right later. And it's also expensive in the sense that you're spending more than you need to on your advertising and your marketing. So what is branding? It's like a big term. People get confused. They say, oh, branding is my logo. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not really your logo. The logo is the foundation of your brand, okay, which is in this hub, right, in this wheel. And if you don't get that hub right, then that wheel just does not turn properly. Okay. So that's really the whole idea, is making sure that that foundation is correct and done well. And then you integrate it on all your channels, the brand voice, web design, TV, radio, print, truck wraps, all those things then integrate that brand. But if you don't have that solid hub, that foundation, that wheel will never turn. And how do people fix that or try to, overcome that obstacle? They spend more money on marketing, right? So you can get a wheel that's not perfectly round to spin. It just takes a significant amount more of effort. So the idea is spend the least amount of money on our marketing and make sure we have a great foundation so that that wheel will spin well. Okay. So again, without a good brand, all your ROI is compromised. That means across all your channels, all the money that you're spending on advertising is being compromised because the brand is not done well. Okay. So it provides the foundation to deliver a positive brand promise. Just again, just one example of a company we rebranded, actually not rebranded, started from scratch. So 0 to 7.5 million in 12 months. Okay. And this is what the brand was done. And then you could see how the brand was integrated on all these different platforms, on the trucks, site signs, all those things, right? And you can see there's a consistent flavor to all of them. They all look like they're coming from the same place. So a brand is also what people say about you behind your back. So if a neighbor was describing the experience of working with your company, what would they actually say about that experience? And having them believe something positive is another big part of it. So every time they interact with your company, impressions are formed, right? So we want to take control of that impression. We want to make them believe something about the experience they may get if you hired them before you actually even get there. Okay. And this way you ring the doorbell and they already have a set of expectations. So look at this company. This is I think they're $130 million company right now in New England. This is their old brand, right? And this is the rebrand. Which looks more professional, which looks like a company that I would expect to pay maybe a premium for their service, right? So this is part of it, right? So how do I control that impression in that consumer's mind before you actually get there, right? Here's another example. This is a company that was around for since 1884, right? You can't really get that vibe from looking at this car. And it looks like a plain white vehicle, which I call white van syndrome, right? And this is the redesign, where I integrate the idea and the notion of history and heritage into this brand and build a disruptive truck wrap design that really stands out and captures the heritage of this company. So what makes a good brand? They're disruptive. They don't fit in. They stand out. They deliver brand promise. Again, brand promise, the idea of controlling what the consumer believes about your company before you get there, right? So before that service happens, they tell the right story quickly and efficiently. They instill themes like confidence, security, and longevity. Certainly naming is a huge part of it too. Memorable name and brand image. And again, why is this a unique opportunity? Because most companies have weak brands or no brands at all and no brand story at all. Like if I asked many of you to say, hey, can you tell me or explain to me what your brand story is? I bet that most of you would not be able to verbalize actually what your brand story, and that's important for a consumer. Having a logo doesn't mean you have a brand. Make sure you understand that distinction. Most brands blend in, are forgotten. Many deliver great service. They don't look like they do. What would happen to the business if they had a better brand? And what would happen if your business looked as good as the work you provide? So the one thing to keep in mind too is you have a lot of people who say, oh my God, like I've been doing this for so long and look how successful I am. Look how well it's going. Why would I ever change? Right. And that idea, that complacency really kills innovation. So I want you to really look inward and say, does my brand do all these things that it's supposed to do? Does it speak a brand promise? Does it look professional? Is it legible on my truck? Do I look like a premium home service provider with that? And if the answer is no, then you have to really look inward and say, hey, is this really a good time for me to change? Does it make sense for me to change? You know, the idea of nothing you are doing today should be considered good enough for tomorrow. And just a couple of examples. But like you say, success in spite of a poor brand is not a valid reason to perpetuate it. Meaning just because you've achieved this level of success today, it's awesome. It's admirable. That's amazing. That tells me that you're running a good shop. It tells me that you really know your numbers. It tells me that you're doing really well with many things. But is it enough? Could we be doing better? Right. So look at even the branding that we did for Tommy Mello. This is Tommy Mello's original brand, right? So Tommy was at $30 million at this point when he came to us and he says, Dan, I don't know if this is really working. I don't know if this is really communicating who we are and how high end and premium of a service we provide. And then this is the rebrand we did for them. And he was at $32 million in revenue at the time that he came to us and asked us to rebrand. I think he's currently over 200 million. And it's just like night and day, like which looks more professional and which looks premium. Okay. There's another company, is for Victor Rancor. Some of you may know him. He's out of Orange County in California. This is his original brand. He was at 3 million at the time when we rebranded him. Again, the white van syndrome you can see here. And this is the rebrand, or his 4.9 to 22 million in 2.5 years. I think he's pushing 30 million right now. Okay. But this is the same company. Which looks more premium? Which would I remember having seen also, which is the other piece of it, right? So that being seen part is so critical. Okay, Gettle. You guys, many of you may be familiar with Gettle, which is a brand that we created about 10 years ago. All right, this is the original branding for Gettle, and then the boy with the flashlight is what we created, and that was 7 million to over 250 million. Okay. So branding won't fix a poorly run company, of course, right? So I want you to get over or understand that, of course, you have to marry up the deliverable with what's being presented. So you can look great and then you ring the doorbell and then you suck once you get inside the house. Okay, so branding obviously is not going to fix that. So let's talk about one thing I talk a lot about in the book, which is brands and consumer bias. They really don't like you. They are really afraid of you. They don't trust you, especially women, right? So how does the brand need to speak to them, right? And you see, said this sometimes with people in mascots, especially, right? And they use mascots like this, right? This is a common mascot. It's this muscled guy, and yeah, he looks like he's about to commit bodily harm if you don't pay. So how does this work for Mrs. Jones, who's already scared shitless about who's coming to her house? How does it make her feel when they see a brand like this, right? Of course, that's really super scary, right? Whereas this one, right, I say, yeah, you're cool with him tucking you in at night. This is a much different impression than this leaves, okay? So think about the impression that your brand leaves with women, especially, which are making up 70 to 80% of the purchasing decisions for home services. So you really need to think carefully about how the brand is actually speaking to them, okay? So why is it hard for you to increase your average tickets, right? So it's one thing you hear a lot of people talk about is I want to increase my average tickets. I want to get paid more for my work. Your brand doesn't make people believe there's a reason why to spend more with you. That's typically the biggest challenge is you don't really look like a company I would expect to pay more for, whether it's your uniforms, whether it's the truck you show up in, whether it's the website that they hit. All those things factor into the perception that consumer has of value and what you bring to the table. So how do good brands counter consumer bias? It puts them at ease. It will help diffuse that negative stereotype that they have. And a good brand aims to make people feel more confident in their choices, meaning to reaffirm your value in helping with why they should pay you more, right? And again, a good brand should match your deliverable, the processes that you have in place. Okay, what happens when you ring the doorbell, using the booties, like all those things play a role in that, right? So a good brand takes control of the conversation and sets the tone. So again, look at a brand like this, which is a company we rebranded, but 8 years ago, 5 trucks, and they just sold for $50 million. And this is the rebrand. And again, it's very intentional with how this was designed in terms of colors and colors that we chose, the image, the look, the aesthetics, and the messaging that goes along with it. So when is it time to rebrand? So these are the questions to kind of ask yourself and say, hey, does this make sense for me, right? So when your brand no longer represents who you are, like maybe you started it and the sign guy did it for you or whatever, and you thought it was going to be good, and you say, hey, I'm going to use this should work for a little while. And then it's like 5 years later and you're like, does this even really work? Is this really who we are today? Does this even make sense? So you got to be introspective. You got to look inward and say, I don't even think this represents who we are today or what we've become. Certainly if your brand blends in with all others in your space. If you can't own your own brand colors, it's another thing to consider. Like if you're in the HVAC space and you're using red, white, and blue, well, chances are 5 other companies in your market are using red, white, and blue too. So why would I remember your colors versus someone else's? Certainly when you realize that you're overspending on your marketing than you could be. And when your brand no longer represents the quality of services you deliver. And certainly when you can check your ego and realize it's holding you back. There's certainly so much ego involved in people's brands. And I get it. Like I understand it. Like you're proud of it. You built it. It's such a, an affirmation for you, a daily affirmation for you. But is it actually really working well? Is it actually holding you back? And I use this graphic, which I think is kind of funny, but this is from Spaceballs. And this is when he says, why didn't anyone tell me my ass was so big? And that's kind of how I look at a lot of brands where like, well, who is actually going to tell you that your brand sucks? Who's going to be the one to say, hey, you know what? I'm your new digital marketing company. Send me your logo and let's build you a website. Oh, and by the way, your logo sucks and we're not going to work with it. Well, no, most of them are not going to tell you that, right? That's not going to happen. So really asking the right people, and I'm not going to tell you your brand sucks just because I need to or want to. I want to tell you that if it really does, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you why. And it's really your call as to whether or not that makes sense to change. But for me, you fix the foundation before you start investing in all this marketing. You fix that and you make sure that's working well. And then all the other marketing is going to work even better. Okay. So like, looking at stuff like this, like if your logo for an HVAC company looks something like this, chances are no one will ever remember it and it's meaningless to most. And it's really difficult to build a brand story around stuff like this. And then again, the idea, oh, everyone tells me they see my vans all over. Yeah, cool story, man. But being seen is only, it isn't enough. It's only half of what's important. Don't mistake your visibility with delivering brand promise. It's a piece of it. It's important. It's great that people maybe tell you that, right? But you got to make sure that that vehicle is working in a manner that is delivering that brand promise. Again, taking control of that conversation before you ring the bell is all about what the brand should be doing. The key to deliver disruption while simultaneously delivering brand promise. Again, that's really what a good brand should do. Many try and most really don't pull it off. But this is an example of something we would say, well, there's nothing really wrong with this particular logo, right? It's okay. It's an orange truck, like it stands out. But he literally had 0 phone calls traced to this wrap design, 0, versus 80 calls within the first 9 months. Right. And everyone told him this is really stupid. Like, why would you put a pepper on your truck? That makes no sense. Like, you're a plumbing and drain company. I don't know why you ever did that. Like, everyone told him this was a huge mistake. Right. But I needed something to connect this name, which is a weird name, with a visual. And that's why I decided to brand it with this pepper. And then the results, again, already show that it worked when he literally had 0 phone calls from this versus 80 on this within the first 3 months. This is another example of something where people told him, oh my God, dude, we see your vans all over. I don't know about you guys, but I can't really read anything on this, right? It's a lot of stuff happening. It's super colorful, but I can't really read anything. And this was the rebrand we did for them. Just, again, being smart about certain things and recognizing that even just the name, which is actually Jay's HVAC, right? So this is where, again, you have to really be smart about the fact that HVAC is a term that most homeowners don't even understand or know it. And then using initials also makes it super hard to be memorable for a brand. And so we said, why don't we just make it Jay's, and then we'll do something with this bird and this idea and these visuals that we created with them. And you can see the way that this was implemented on his trucks. I think these are certainly much cleaner and much more legible to read and understand than something like this, okay? So certainly, I said earlier, this white van syndrome, you certainly don't need to suffer from white van syndrome. I think it's really a mistake to continue to use white vans. It's really difficult to stand out. This is an example of one that has actually a decent amount of color, not fully white, but it's still generally white. And then this is the rebrand. And this is actually super cool truck wrap design that we had done in branding. And then the light bulb on this truck literally actually lights up. It's not reflective. It actually has a photoluminescence material. It runs on 12 volts and it actually lights up at night. And you could make it blink. You could do some cool shit with it. So anyway, this one, super disruptive. And what's more important as not just it's a cool wrap, but the numbers, right? So this is what I'm talking about, the effect of online marketing with branding and well-branded trucks. So the direct traffic for this company after launching was up 2,700% or 539%, an additional 2,700 hits. Okay. Organic search up 21% immediately after rebranding. Okay. So that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about winning on the streets, right? Another white van. This is the redesign. You can see how obviously we improved on that. And again, too, the idea of like, well, again, let's spend the least amount of money possible on our logo. And I'm just going to say, and obviously it sounds self-serving to say this, but the most expensive logo you'll ever buy is one you paid the least for. And why is that? Well, what does that mean? And a lot of that has to do with, again, how much more money you'll need to spend on all your other areas, all your other channels, how much it's costing you in lower average tickets, how much it's costing you in inability to recruit properly, things like that. Okay. A couple examples, $5.5 million to $9.5 million in 2 years since rebranding. We already went through this one. It's just sold for $50 million. They had $1.5 million when they started. This is another company too. When we talk about average tickets, this is really important. So average tickets increased from 6,100 to 10,600 in 4 years. Now, of course, there's some inflation in there, but that's a pretty substantial jump. And the other part of this that's really important is the fact that they went from 2.5 to 12 million. And in doing so, they did that with less than 5% spend, right? So less than 5% of revenue was spent on advertising and they grew that much. Okay. So when people are telling you, oh my God, you got to spend 10% on marketing, it's bullshit. A lot of people are telling you that you got to spend 10% on marketing are people with really, really poor brands. Okay. So 619%, 121, these are all just examples of companies that we've rebranded. Colors, super important for you. Again, like I said, don't choose red, white, and blue if you're an HVAC contractor, if possible. Really hard to be very unique and disruptive and distinct with that. Avoid common colors that are used in your market. So if you're rebranding, survey the land and just say, oh my God, there's 5 companies using this. I'm going to do something different. So think about being disruptive. Consider colors that you haven't seen put together. Okay. So this is a brand that we did for a company in Vegas, 7.5 million to 23 million in 12 months, called Fetch-A-Tech. Again, a very unique color palette, and it was very deliberately chosen because of their market and because of the saturation of a lot of other colors that we knew we couldn't own in that particular space. Another client here, again, very distinct color schemes that we're picking for these companies. Brand names, super important, really hard to do, to get good branding done with names that don't work very well, right? So are they forgettable or are they memorable? So names which conjure up a similar graphic, like Jay's earlier, are inherently easy to remember. Initial-based brands are the hardest to remember. So if your name is TJS Landscaping or TJS Heating and Air, very, very difficult to ever have a homeowner remember that and remember a specific brand promise that goes along with it. Obviously, trademarking is important in terms of thinking about names, making sure you choose names that aren't trademarked. That could be a whole other webinar. This is a company that used to be called In Phase, and we renamed them Over the Moon. Vegas Strong was the old name. Bumble Breeze is the new name. This company is called 1-800-AIR, even though that wasn't their phone numbers. It was like super confusing. And then we named them Jackrabbit. Hop to It. Again, a couple examples, Rise and Shine. All Hard is another company we named. And again, we talked earlier about the fact about how branding plays a role in recruitment. No one wants the works for us. Is there another reason why? Perhaps it's probably you, not them. So culture and branding work together to attract talent. They create an internal environment that embodies your brand, right? So that's really important. Reinforce your core values, your mission visually, create an environment potential employees would be proud to be part of. Obviously, making sure the uniforms, business cards, all those things work well. Forward is a way of life. This is for Amanda at Grasshopper. You could see the old company name was PMA Mechanical. This company has gone from, I think, 100,000 in residential sales to, I think they're pushing now 12 or 13 million in 2 years. So these are just examples of some wall wraps and things like that that integrate branding that you guys can then use or use throughout your office space to integrate the branding. These are some uniforms that we've designed. So quickly, branding mistakes and how to avoid them. Biggest things is designing with a committee will assure you of weak creative. Means asking everyone you know what they think about something is often the way to not actually get a good deliverable at the end of that project. Designing for yourself instead of your target audience. What you like is less important than what your audience likes. So always frame brands in the sense of, what does Mrs. Jones think about this? Will it attract her? Will it make her believe something? Make sure you hire the right people for this, of course. Listening to the wrong people with little to no experience in building brands who give a brand rights, which in turn will cost you thousands of dollars later. Certain things I've heard, like, oh my God, mascots don't work, or you need to look like a world-class company, things like that. Oh my God. All right. So that was a ton of stuff I hopefully just got through. This is a QR code to my book if anybody wants to get my book. And I got 2 minutes, I think, or 3 minutes if there's any questions, or if Logan wants to come in and ask any questions.
All right, Dan, I got a couple questions for you. So first one, as a company who has had the same look for 15 plus years, do you find that there's a transition period where business drops before it goes back up after rebranding?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, a lot of care and diligence has to be taken in the launch of the new brand. And assuming that is done correctly, we have never seen a net decrease in revenue subsequent to a rebrand. Okay, but if you just roll it out, you don't explain anything that's going on, you don't let your existing customers know what's going on, then perhaps you might see something like that happen. But you've got to be very diligent in how it's actually done. And honestly, we have never seen it not work. Let's put it that way.
Love it. Another question I got was, do we all need mascots?
You don't all need mascots, and mascots are not always the right solution. It really depends on the market. It depends on the competitive landscape. It depends on what you're trying to communicate. A lot of it sometimes has to do with naming as well. Certain names are going to flow better and work better with something that's maybe a little bit more fun than a different name. Like Jay's uses a mascot, but it's not a traditional mascot. It's more like an icon of that bird flying. Okay. So like there's different ways to do that. Even Absolute Air uses a icon based approach. So it really depends on market. It's not always the right answer. And you just have to really do, really study the competitive landscape before you make those decisions.
Love it. I got one more for you. So if somebody is wanting to rebrand, and I will say like Dan's at all your stuff is very professionally done. Let's say somebody's got more of a limited budget. Is it better to save up and then reach out when they got the money, or is it better to do something in the interim now just to kind of limit the downside before reaching out down the road?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think you have to be careful with how much investment you're going to make, which will then utilize a logo that maybe isn't as good as you would like it to be, because you're going to then have to rewrap trucks. You're going to have to then get new uniforms. But I understand the need to have something. Like, you got to have something out there while you're trying to grow the business, right? So if you can't afford to do it right from day one, then just be careful with how much of an investment you make in implementation of that initial brand, knowing in the back of your mind, hey, you know what, I'm not going to order like 10,000 brochures or 5,000 of this. I'm just going to try to keep those things, spend the least amount of money as possible until I can afford to do it the right way.
Love it. Dan, hey man, I appreciate it. Guys, if you want to learn more about this stuff, scan that QR code, get the book. I got the book. I've gone through it. I absolutely love it, man. So Dan, I appreciate you hopping on this, man. That was fantastic.